Hi everyone. Well, if you have done your readings or you've even looked at them, you may have already realized that we are getting into the theory portion of this semester where we're going to just be focusing, let's see, this week, next week, maybe the week after, on some key theories of human interaction and by extension, computer-mediated interaction. We're going to be talking about how those theories sort of extend to computer-mediated arenas. And I think the reason it's important to sort of think about these theories is it helps us analyze what's going on so that we can make the best decisions in terms of putting our best foot forward when we're using these social media tools that we use in order to form our professional or personal identity. Again, I don't like making this all about professional because I think anything relevant for the professional is relevant for the personal. Say it every week if I have to. Okay. So you had two readings this week. One of them is a really nicely written piece that I think really does a good job of applying Irving Goffman's dramaturgy model. I don't know if you've gotten this in any of your classes, but it wouldn't surprise me if you had. And even if you hadn't, I'll be honest with you, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I actually think, and I don't say this often, it's one of the easiest theories to explain because Goffman has created this wonderful metaphor. All the world's a stage. He understands human interaction as being like acting, right? Where we have a front stage where we have to play different roles, and those roles might change depending on what the audience is and what the stage is. So if I'm at work, I'm playing a different role. If I'm at home, I'm playing a different role as a wife and pug mama and a chicken owner, well, like whatever. These are all my different roles that I play when I'm there. And then the backstage is where you don't have to play a role. There's probably no audience, or it's an audience of only the closest people to you, where you don't actually feel like you have to manage your impression. You can put your hands in your pants and burp and fart and do whatever you want. I mean, like that's like very backstage behavior. So maybe some people don't ever get to see your backstage, and maybe that's for the best. And Goffman's whole model, right, is trying to analyze how people shift in different roles and analyzing, and you read some of this, what happens when your roles come into conflict. We try for them not to, but sometimes they do. So if you're trying to, if I'm trying to look like a credible professor and I'm dressing up like an octopus on my social media account, like, oh, that's an foreshadowing already about social media, but whatever. How do those, how do we negotiate those conflicts, right? How do we resolve is a better word for it. How do we resolve those conflicts or prevent them from happening to begin with? And what I want to really focus on is more from the Boyd piece, which is talking about how social media has really complicated those reconciliation processes for us. It's made it more difficult for us to keep our front stage and our backstage separate. It's more importantly made it more importantly for us to navigate those instances when our roles come in conflict. But I do want to point out that even though social network sites, for instance, have made this really complicated, it's not necessarily new to social network sites. I think it's a phenomenon that's happened with digital media in general. You might catch that at some point in the Dana Boyd chapter, she writes about Josh Meyrowitz. Josh Meyrowitz wrote a book, I think it was like the late 80s, called No Sense of Place, and I read this in grad school and it was really influential to me. He was writing about how you know, it used to be that if you are a public figure, and he was talking a lot about public figures, but if you're a public figure, it used to be that a politician, for instance, could say one message to one audience and then go and say something completely opposite to a different audience. But you can't really do that anymore. We don't have like, oh, this is a space that this audience is in, and this is a space that that audience is in. Why? Because we have technologies like camcorders, or 80s, I'm sorry, camcorder. But we have cameras and recording devices that make it so that all of a sudden that message can go in the other space too, even if you meant it for that space. There's nothing, the boundary that was keeping your message from going to a different audience is no longer there thanks to these digital technologies. A real world example that happened after Meyerowitz was writing, although he had plenty of examples to work with himself, is for those of you that remember the 2012 election, Mitt Romney got in some hot public water because he was at a fundraiser or something, and he said something that, and I'm not being ambivalent to spare Mitt Romney, but I literally can't remember what the quote was. It was something about the certain percentage of Americans, and it was kind of derogatory about half of Americans or something, or X, Y, or Z. The message itself isn't important. The important point, though, is that he meant that for this audience of people who he was fundraising with. What happened, though, was somebody had their phone and like was filming him under the table, and then that message ended up going viral, right? This was a situation where Romney could not contain that message. The role he was playing there, right, somehow got pushed out to where he did not want to play that role. And that's the type of stuff that Josh Meyerowitz was talking about back in the 80s. What's different now, even more so, is that, in that example, it was a case of where, yes, this digital device allowed, made it more difficult for Romney to sort of keep his impression management goals locked into like this one little space. But thanks to social network sites, we have to kind of do this on a daily basis, right? Because what social network sites have done is what Dana Boyd calls context collapse. Whenever you go online, whenever you're on a social network site, you're in a space now that doesn't have clear context at all. I mean, what happened in the Romney example I just gave is like there was this context, and somehow what was said in that context got moved to other context. Every time you go on a social network site, you're in this place where all of the contexts have collapsed. Now, this happens in our life, in other places in our life too. Think about weddings and funerals. One of the reasons why weddings, in my opinion, are not as fun as they should be is because, okay, you go to a friend's wedding, you're looking forward to like hanging out with your friends, or maybe it's your wedding. Better example. It's your wedding. You can't wait to celebrate with your friends. But guess what? It's not just your friends. It's your family. Maybe it's some teachers from a long time ago. Maybe it's your mother's coworkers, whatever. The point is like, it's this, we do occasionally have these events in our life when people from all of the different social buckets, all of these different audiences that we have, and we're trying to manage different impressions with. With my friends, I want to be fun. With my coworkers, I want to be professional. All these things, but they all come together, and then you have to sort of decide who you're going to be. And that's really difficult because you are playing different roles with all of these different people. And every time you walk onto a social network site, you're in that situation. And Boyd, of course, talks about how this is really complicated, especially for young people who might not even know their identity yet, right? And also are really trying to prioritize really important things like friendships. You know how important friends are for teens, but they also have to like worry about college admissions and, making sure that they come across as, upstanding youth so that they can get what they need. I would argue that it must be particularly hard for young people for all of those different reasons, but it's hard for us too. So I assign this Boyd article not because I think that we're all like teenagers, but on some level, I don't think that their struggles are much different than ours. It's just that we usually have a little bit more of our lives figured out than them. The other thing I wanted to mention is, we talked about this a little bit last week. Even if you have your impression management game put together, right? Even if you're the best person at sort of managing all of these different face demands that you have when, the context collapse and all these different groups are demanding that you, put forward your best impression for all of them. It's still really hard because you're not in complete control. And Goffman talks about this too, about how group dynamics affect individual impression management. Like, it's not just about you, because even if you put the best foot forward, somebody might tag you in a photo that maybe isn't your best foot forward. Putting feet forward is so weird. I'm bringing it up just as another way of showing how things have become extremely complicated in terms of our self-presentation thanks to social network sites, because again, you are in this area where you are in this space where you have to worry about the impression you're giving to all these different audiences. But on top of that, you have to worry about all these other people who are also able to give an impression of you to all these different people in this space. So obviously that is complicated. Now, look, most social network sites give you a lot of tools to try to help manage this, right? Like, so you have uh, privacy settings, and a while ago, Google was trying to do this whole Google Circles thing. I don't know if you remember this, where it was literally trying to help you put certain people in buckets so that you could sort of navigate your post for different audiences in the same way that we do interpersonally, right? How we act one way when we're at work and one way we're at home. Google was trying to help us with that, and other social network sites have rolled out different things to do it. But another thing that I think Boyd aptly brings up is that even if those tools are helpful for you, and I think they're helpful for a lot of reasons, they're not perfect, right? Because it also assumes that you can anticipate all of the audiences that you need to navigate around. And Boyd talks about the difference between there's imagined audiences and then there's actual audiences. And normally we do have some sort of imagined audience in our head when we're making posts on different social network sites, right? Like we have an idea of either who the post is for or who might see it. But that's a far cry from knowing who actually sees it. The people that we intend things for might not be the ones watching, and there could be people watching, maybe not even in your direct social network. Again, the way technology works is like all you need is like a screen grab, and it can go to other places. So even that's not sort of like a foolproof plan of doing things. One of the things that she mentioned that teenagers were doing a lot of is actually experimenting with having different identities on different platforms. And part of that, of course, involved a little bit of, I don't know what you would call, well, I mean, even Goffman called us con artists, right? Of maybe having different names associated with different accounts and everything. And this allowed teens to sort of navigate this terrain by saying, okay, on Instagram, I'm going to be Elizabeth, but on Twitter, I'm going to be Love Badger. Love Badger was my Twitter handle. It's still there, but I haven't used it in like 10 years. But that was a private Twitter handle I had just for social reasons. Actually, on Twitter, I had two accounts. I had Love Badger for personal things, which you will be able to see. And then I had a professional account, which again is still there but not active because I'm a bad social media instructor. And I posted to my academic people there, and then I had the private one where I experimented with my identity or whatever. Now, Dana Boyd mentioned that Mark Zuckerberg called that deception. What did he say? He said trying to have two identities on Facebook is an act of deception, which is kind of ironic coming from Mark Zuckerberg, what with the fake news regulation and everything. But yeah, I mean, I share Boyd's sort of incredulity at hearing that from Mark Zuckerberg, because I don't, the idea that you could have different accounts to manage your identities doesn't sound to me much different than what we have always done and what Irving Goffman has always said that we do, which is like we play different roles in different stages, right, to different audiences. And so I'm actually a big fan of that strategy. I don't think it's perfect, and I don't think that, people can expect that to resolve all of the dissonance that they have when they're trying to, navigate multiple audiences, because obviously people can always link up accounts and you always leave little trails of who you are. But, I don't think it's a bad way to approach certain things. I think it allows us some flexibility, because I also don't think that it's healthy, for instance, when I hear this all the time, my undergraduates will tell me that they've been told, not to post pictures of themselves like having a beer on social media. And I'm like, I mean, it depends. Like, are you applying for a job where, what's the word, where alcohol's not allowed? Like, it's not, I think telling people that they shouldn't ever show any of their backstage behaviors or the behaviors that they use with other groups is kind of the wrong message too, because then it makes you look bland and not interesting. We've had undergraduates in our program before that have actually had job offers rescinded because the types of things that they were showing on social media was definitely much more friend geared than it was geared for their professional audience. But I think that telling people not to show different parts of themselves, especially in this day and age where I do think that people have kind of an understanding that there is context collapse and we're always trying to figure out which parts of ourselves we want to show at different times. I think the norms are changing and we're becoming more accustomed to seeing the different facets of people. I think this is one reason why, for better or worse, right, we know more about people's political beliefs, right? It used to be that you would never talk politics with, maybe if you're like my family, we would never even talk politics at Thanksgiving or whatever. But now I know all about my family's politics, again, for better or worse. But it's because we're in an era right now where we're getting to know, I guess, more of people's sides. Just to reiterate, I guess what I'm arguing, or something I just want to leave you with to think about, is whether or not in the current climate we have with social network sites, it's good to just tell people to just like shut it all down and not show any of their self, when instead maybe we just need to think about the best ways to negotiate that. And again, I'll just offer that I think that having multiple accounts, except on Facebook, because stupid Mark Zuckerberg, having multiple accounts might be a small way of, might provide a small stepping stone to doing those types of things successfully. If, again, the privacy settings aren't working and things like that. But those are just my thoughts. I'm not testing you on that or anything like that. Just food for thought. Okay, but that is impression management. Bye.